My guest is Barry Rubin. He's the director of Gloria Research Center on the Middle East and editor and publisher of Meria, a very important journal. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Barry, we want to discuss this time the role of Syria, and you've described Syria as central to the Middle East equation. Why do you think it's so central?
Well, because Syria is the chief Arab ally of Iran, and it's the most important radical regime in the Arab world. If it were all by itself, it would be a very different matter, but it's part of a system of revolutionary movements, starting with Iran, and then Hezbollah, the Lebanese Islamist group, Hamas, the Palestinian Islamist group, the insurgents in Iraq, who simultaneously are part of al-Qaeda, the organization of Osama bin Laden, and yet under Syrian sponsorship, a fact which seems to elude people entirely, even though it's right out there in the public. And so they are the main disruptive force in the Arab world. Anti-American, anti-Western, anti-Canadian, I'm sure, and of course, anti-Israel.
But the picture being portrayed is that Syria is seeking constructive engagement, wants to get out of its isolation and doing all these things, and that America is just responding to that. You don't agree with that?
Well, it's a con game, and it's so easily it's easy to demonstrate it. One hardly knows where to begin, but where you begin is you have to read the Syrian media and listen to what the government says in Arabic. It literally boggles the mind that the Syrian government can invite Iranian President Ahmadinejad, the leader of Hezbollah. They meet. They make anti-Western, anti-American, anti-Israel remarks. Here's an example, and this is a specific example, but I don't think it will age very much. The U.S. Asked the Arab League to support the idea of indirect negotiations between the Palestinians and Israel. The Arab states discussed it and gave an agreement to do so. The New York Times published one paragraph from a Syrian government news agency statement. The chairman of the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee praised Syria for being so moderate as to support indirect negotiations. In fact, all you have to do is read the Syrian news agency, and it says very clearly that Syria opposed supporting the indirect negotiations. They were against it. They tried to sabotage it. And in fact, Syria called for resistance, which is a code word for political violence. Now, this is right here in this official dispatch, and yet it's ignored partly because a lot of people didn't read it, but also because they've got this mindset that it has to be moderate, and no matter what they do. I mean, you're talking about a government which, when it was reported by the International Atomic Energy Agency that there was evidence of radioactive uranium which showed that they were secretly building a nuclear power plant, claimed officially the government's presentation was that Israel had tried to set them up by having planes fly over Syria and drop radioactive uranium out of the planes so it would fall to Earth and be discovered.
I never heard that story.
Well, because people don't pick up on this stuff. And why? Because they really argue it doesn't matter what the evidence is. It doesn't matter what anything said in Arabic doesn't count, because they know better, that they know that Syria really wants to be moderate because they believe it's in the interests.
But how do you explain then that this all-white sort of nationalist regime in Syria is allied with an Islamist regime in Iran? Why?
Precisely for that reason, because they need, there are a number of factors. First of all, let's define Alawites are 12% of the population. They follow a very particular religion, which in my opinion is definitely not a Muslim religion. And when I talk to Arabs, they laugh and say, well, of course we don't regard Alawites as Muslims. But precisely because they need the cover, the religious cover, because 60% of the population of Syria are Sunni Muslims. And therefore, the Alawites have to prove that they're good and upstanding Muslims. And by supporting Islamist movements abroad, not within the country, they make 60% of the population extremely happy, and the regime is very popular with them. But there are a number of reasons why. See, what's frustrating to me about this is, for the next 3 minutes, I can demonstrate that Syrian-Iranian alliance is here to stay, and Syria doesn't want to become moderate.
I'll take your conclusion.
And but not a single argument here appears in the media. Iran, I'll do it in 60 seconds.
Well, give me Lebanon. Just point to Lebanon.
Well, it's right over there. No. Look, Syrian economy depends on Iranian money. Syria pays off, Iranian money. Iran pays off Syria's clients like Hamas and Hezbollah. Iran is who they look to for protection from Israel and the United States, especially when they know that Iran is going to have nuclear weapons. They believe they're winning. Iran and Syria cooperate in trying to take over Lebanon. Syria supports Hamas, and Hamas's headquarters are in Syria. Syria trains, arms, and puts across the border terrorists who go into Iraq and kill Iraqis and kill Americans. And the list goes on. And it's a very powerful list. Now, in one sentence, the problem is that if the regime were to make peace with Israel, if the regime were to open up economically to the West, that it would be very much weakened. That why doesn't Syria make peace with Israel? Well, first of all, because Syria views itself as the leaders of the revolutionary. They believe they're doing very well. They know that this keeps popular support. They have a foreign enemy as an excuse for their domestic oppression and incompetence. And if Israel were ever to become a regular factor in the region, Syrian and Israeli interests are opposed on every issue. Syria wants to dominate Lebanon, Jordan, and the Palestinians. Israel doesn't want to have Syria dominating it. Now, that's a very brief presentation, which could be made at greater length. But why aren't these points made? And the pretense, well, of course they want to be moderate. Of course they want to make peace with Israel. This kind of blindness is disastrous, and it's ridiculous.
So you're saying essentially that not only is any approach to them to make a moderate kind of deal with the West not workable, but it's really not. It actually undermines any Western approach. It's a negative.
It encourages them to be more aggressive, and all you have to do is read what the Syrian leaders say and what the official media said. And the Saudis and the Jordanians and the Lebanese Christians and Sunni Muslims and Jews know what I'm saying, and they agree with what I'm saying, and a lot of in what they say, especially in private, and what they do. And it leads to ludicrous situations like when Secretary of State of the United States goes to Syria, asks them to close the terrorist offices, and announces that the Syrians have agreed, and then a reporter picks up his phone, calls the offices of the terrorist groups, and they're open as normal. And this story is carried out over and over and over again. I heard former Secretary of State of the United States, James Baker, on radio say that negotiations with Syria worked because, he said, after all, 10 years ago, we negotiated with them to close the terrorist offices. Well, the terrorist offices are still open today in 2010. So it's this mindset that no one can really be radical. It's in everybody's interest to be moderate, that I'm so charming that if I talk to them, they'll want to make a deal, that it's more beneficial to them. It has nothing to do with the actual world. And therefore, as a policy, it's disastrous.
We're going to end with that point. Thank you, Barry.
Thank you.